Shropshire, England, June 1816. The morning air carried the biting chill of an unseasonable winter that refused to yield to summer, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming hawthorn that shivered in the cold wind. The hired carriage rattled to a halt before the limestone facade of Thornley Manor, the horse's breath visible in the damp air. From the drawing-room window, Lady Beatrice Ashton watched with mounting horror as the door opened, and a figure emerged that bore no resemblance to the demure cousin she had expected to receive. Miss Cerridwen Hughes leapt from the carriage before the driver could even lower the step to the gravel. Her dark travelling cloak billowed behind her like the wings of some wild creature refusing domestication. Raven hair escaped its pins in defiant curls, whipping against her cheeks in the gusting wind. Even from this distance, Beatrice could see the scatter of sun-dusted markings across a face that had clearly spent too many hours under the Welsh sun without a bonnet. This was no English rose. This was a Celtic warrior grudgingly donning the robes of civilization. Beatrice pressed her fingers to her temple, already composing the letter she would write to Uncle Daffyd Hughes, explaining why this endeavour was doomed before it began. How was she meant to introduce this untamed creature to polite society when the girl looked as though she would rather scale the nearest mountain than curtsy to a duchess? If stories of fierce independence colliding with rigid propriety move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. 28 years old and still unmarried, Cerridwen heard the whispered judgment before anyone spoke it aloud. She had grown accustomed to such assessments during her 6 weeks in England, just as she had grown accustomed to disappointing everyone who met her. Her father's ultimatum echoed in her memory with the clarity of a death knell. Accept this season in English society and make a genuine attempt at matrimony, or resign herself to marriage with Colonel Harrington. The colonel was a widower of 62 who had buried 3 wives and sought a 4th with the grim determination of a man stockpiling provisions for a siege. She had sworn upon her mother's grave never to marry an Englishman. The English had taken so much from Wales already. She would not surrender her independence to become some lord's silent ornament, displayed like a curiosity in his drawing room alongside imported vases and stuffed pheasants. Yet here she stood, an exile in her cousin's elegant manor, surrounded by landscapes that lacked the dramatic grandeur of Snowdonia's peaks. The gentle rolling hills of Shropshire seemed to mock her with their domestication, just as English society would mock her failure to conform. The weather, at least, matched her mood. The grey skies and constant drizzle of this strange cold summer felt like a reflection of her own spirit. Inside Thornley Manor, Beatrice awaited with barely concealed dismay and an extensive list of rules Cerridwen was expected to follow. The instruction began immediately over a tea service of fine bone china. "You must never express strong opinions in mixed company," Beatrice announced, her voice carrying the patient tone one might use with a particularly slow child. "English gentlemen find intellectual discourse from ladies quite off-putting. Then English gentlemen must possess remarkably fragile constitutions," Cerridwen replied, accepting her teacup with deliberate grace. "In Wales, we value minds capable of holding ideas without shattering." Beatrice's cup rattled against its saucer. "You cannot speak so directly. Subtlety, dearest cousin, is the art of civilization, and dishonesty is apparently its foundation." The following weeks proved an education in disappointment for both women. Beatrice despaired of ever transforming her Welsh cousin into something resembling a proper English lady. Cerridwen despaired that anyone could willingly participate in a society so determined to suffocate anything genuine beneath layers of meaningless propriety. The invitation to the Midsummer Assembly arrived in late June, delivered on cream-coloured cardstock embossed with gilt lettering. Beatrice treated it with the reverence others reserved for religious relics. "Lord Charles Lockwood will be in attendance," she announced, her eyes bright with schemes. "The Earl of Ravenfield. You must make a favourable impression." "Must I?" Cerridwen examined the invitation with considerably less enthusiasm. "And why should this particular Earl command such attention?" "Because he is seeking a wife, and you, dear cousin, are seeking to avoid Colonel Harrington." The alignment of interests could hardly be more convenient. Lord Charles Lockwood, Earl of Ravenfield, stood near the refreshment table at the Midsummer Assembly and contemplated the very real possibility that duty might kill him before age did. The ballroom of the assembly rooms glittered with candlelight, reflected in crystal chandeliers, offering a warm refuge from the unseasonable chill outside. The air carried the mingled scents of rosewater, pomade, and the desperate ambitions of mothers, determined to secure advantageous matches for their daughters. His mother, Constance, Dowager Countess of Ravenfield, had presented him with a list. Not suggestions, mind you, but a methodically compiled catalogue of suitable candidates, complete with detailed assessments of bloodlines, dowries, and temperaments. Miss Eugenia Fairmont topped the list. A young woman whose enthusiasm for botanical classification suggested she might approach marriage with the same systematic thoroughness. At 33 years old and recently elevated to his title following his brother's untimely death, Charles understood duty. He had served in the peninsula, watched men die for abstractions like honor and country, and learned that sometimes survival required setting aside personal preference for the greater good. Marriage, his mother insisted with increasing frequency, represented his duty to the Ravenfield legacy. An heir was needed. Bloodlines must be preserved. The family name required a suitable countess. Yet as Miss Eugenia described the taxonomical classification of English garden roses with earnest precision, Charles felt a profound emptiness settle over him like a burial shroud. This was his future. Polite conversations about horticulture, a marriage of duty producing an heir of duty. A legacy built on everything except genuine feeling. It was precisely then that he noticed her. She stood near the entrance with Lady Beatrice Ashton, and the contrast between them suggested a flame burning beside an oil lamp. Where other ladies had fashioned their hair into elaborate constructions, requiring hours of labor and considerable quantities of pomade, this woman's raven hair was simply dressed, curling rebelliously at her temples despite obvious attempts at control. Her complexion bore the golden touch of the sun, evidence of time spent outdoors without the protective veil of a bonnet. Her gown of deep blue silk was well made, but lacked the excessive ornamentation favored by other guests, and she surveyed the ballroom with an expression that suggested she was mentally calculating escape routes. Nearby, Charles noticed Sir Percival Hertford, an eccentric old baronet known for his progressive views, watching the newcomer with a rare smile of approval. But the rest of the room seemed to be holding its breath in judgment. Charles excused himself from Miss Eugenia's botanical discourse with practiced courtesy and made his way toward Lady Beatrice. He had known her since childhood, and she greeted him with transparent relief. "Lord Charles, how wonderful to see you. May I present my cousin, Miss Cerridwen Hughes of Snowdonia?" The Welsh woman regarded him with eyes of startling violet, and Charles felt something shift in his carefully ordered world. She did not blush or simper. She did not lower her gaze with affected modesty. Instead, she offered a curtsy of technically correct but notably perfunctory execution, and when she spoke, her voice carried a melodic accent that transformed English words into something approaching music. "Lord Charles," she inclined her head, "my cousin speaks highly of your family's standing, though I confess such genealogical achievements have always struck me as rather arbitrary measures of value. A person's worth should derive from their actions and character, not their grandfather's success at securing royal favor 3 centuries ago." The silence that followed her statement stretched long enough for Lady Beatrice to make a small, strangled sound of horror. Charles felt something unprecedented happen. He smiled. Not the polite mask he wore during social obligations, but a true expression of amusement and something that might have been relief. "Miss Hughes, you have just articulated a sentiment I have harbored in considerably less eloquent terms for the better part of a decade. Though I warn you, expressing such views in English drawing rooms is likely to earn you a reputation for dangerous radicalism." "I already possess that reputation, my lord. I read Mary Wollstonecraft." "Dear God," Beatrice murmured. "Then perhaps you can settle a dispute," Charles said, aware that he was behaving with unprecedented impropriety, but finding himself entirely unconcerned. "Lady Beatrice claims that insipid English country dances require considerable skill. I have long suspected they are merely exercises in conformity. What is your assessment?" Cerridwen's eyes lit with something that might have been challenge or delight. The Welsh have reels that require actual coordination and stamina, my lord. Your English dances are to genuine folk traditions what a caged songbird is to its wild cousins. Technically similar, but lacking everything that makes them vital. You wound our national pride, Miss Hughes. I merely observe what any honest assessment would confirm. Then perhaps you will permit me the opportunity to defend English dancing by requesting your hand for the next set. If I can demonstrate that our traditions possess more vitality than you credit, will you concede the point? Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. Then she inclined her head. I accept your challenge, Lord Charles. Though I warn you, I have never conceded a point simply to preserve social harmony. Miss Hughes, I would be profoundly disappointed if you did. The dance that followed would be discussed in Shropshire drawing rooms for weeks afterward. Not because of any technical brilliance, but because of the complete absorption of both participants. Charles, known for his punctilious correctness, seemed entirely focused on his partner rather than maintaining proper social awareness of the room around them. Miss Hughes moved with a natural grace that suggested she was accustomed to more vigorous exercise than most English ladies, and when she laughed at something he said, the sound carried sincere pleasure rather than practiced artifice. Lady Beatrice watched from the edge of the ballroom with mounting concern. This was not proceeding according to plan. Her cousin was meant to make a tolerable impression, perhaps secure a respectable if modest proposal. She was not meant to capture the complete attention of one of the county's most eligible bachelors in a manner that would inevitably attract notice and speculation. Across the ballroom, Constance, Dowager Countess of Ravenfield, observed her son with considerably less benign feelings. She had spent months cultivating suitable candidates, arranging strategic introductions, steering Charles toward appropriate choices. Miss Eugenia Fairmont represented everything the Ravenfield title required: good bloodlines, substantial dowry, proper education, and a temperament unlikely to challenge established order. This Welsh creature represented everything unseemly. Unknown family connections, uncertain lineage, provincial origins, and most damning of all, the unmistakable evidence of a mind that questioned rather than accepted. Constance had not navigated English society for 4 decades without learning to recognize threats to carefully laid plans. The dance concluded. Charles escorted Miss Hughes back to Lady Beatrice with obvious reluctance, and Constance noted with alarm that he immediately requested her cousin's direction for calling. This required immediate intervention. The following morning, Charles arrived at Thornley Manor at the earliest hour that could be considered acceptable for social calls. He found Cerridwen in Lady Beatrice's library. Lady Beatrice herself was present, seated in a winged armchair near the fireplace to guard against the damp chill, though she appeared half asleep over her needlepoint. Cerridwen stood before the bookshelves with a leather-bound volume in her hands, reading with the complete absorption of someone who had temporarily forgotten the world existed beyond the page. Godwin's Political Justice, he observed from the doorway. Appropriate choice for someone who finds genealogical privilege arbitrary. She turned, and he noted that surprise transformed her features before she regained composure. Lord Charles, I did not expect you would actually call. Most English gentlemen issue invitations they have no intention of honoring as a form of elaborate politeness. I am not most English gentlemen, Miss Hughes. That is becoming apparent. They settled into conversation with the ease of people who had been seeking precisely such discourse without realizing it. Under Beatrice's drowsy supervision, Charles found himself discussing political philosophy, the lingering effects of the war, and the challenges of managing estates in changing economic circumstances. Cerridwen responded with observations that revealed both education and independent thought, qualities he had not encountered in the carefully cultivated ladies his mother presented for his consideration. "Why did you reject 6 suitors?" he asked, aware the question exceeded propriety, but finding he valued candor over convention. She regarded him for a long moment before answering. "Because they did not want a partner, Lord Charles. They wanted an ornament, a vessel for producing heirs, a hostess who would smile and agree and never express an opinion that might challenge their comfortable assumptions about the world. I would rather remain unmarried than become a silent statue in someone else's life. That seems a reasonable position. English society disagrees. I am 28 years old and unwed, By your standards, I am a failure, a spinster who has exceeded her value and should accept whatever circumstances desperation offers. You assume I share those standards. Do you not? You are Earl of Ravenfield. You require an heir. Duty demands you select an appropriate wife from among the suitable candidates your mother has doubtless identified. I am Welsh, opinionated, sun-touched, and 28 years old. By every measure your society employs, I represent an unsuitable choice. Charles leaned forward, his expression serious. Perhaps I am tired of letting society's measures determine my choices. The words hung between them, weighted with implication. Cerridwen felt her heart accelerate in a manner that had nothing to do with political philosophy, and everything to do with the way Charles Lockwood looked at her, as though she were something remarkable rather than unseemly. I must return to my cousin, she said, glancing toward Beatrice, who stirred in her chair. May I call again tomorrow? That would be most improper, my lord. You have already called once today. I am beginning to suspect that impropriety might be considerably more interesting than I previously believed. Lord Charles, you should not say such things. Why not? You advocate for sincere expression over social pretense. When I advocate for such things, I am dismissed as a Welsh radical. When you express similar sentiments, you risk considerably more. You have a title to maintain, a family legacy to preserve. I would not wish to be the cause of damage to either. Charles stood as well, moving closer but maintaining the precise distance propriety required. Miss Hughes, I spent years in the peninsula following orders and performing duty. I watched men die for abstractions. I returned to England and learned my brother had died, leaving me with a title I never sought and responsibilities I never wanted. I've spent months allowing my mother to parade candidates before me as though I were selecting livestock at market. And I have felt nothing. Do you understand? Nothing. Until last night, when you informed me that genealogical privilege was an arbitrary measure of value, I had begun to suspect I might never feel anything genuine again. Charles. His given name escaped her lips before she could prevent it, an intimacy far exceeding anything their brief acquaintance justified. May I call again tomorrow? He repeated. Yes, she whispered. Yes, you may. The weeks that followed established a pattern that delighted both participants while alarming various observers. Charles called at Thornley Manor with increasing frequency, always at hours technically permissible but chosen to maximize opportunities for conversation. They discussed poetry, politics, philosophy. They debated the merits of English versus Welsh landscapes with passionate intensity. They discovered shared appreciation for honesty in a world that seemed to prize elaborate pretense. Lady Beatrice attempted to balance genuine pleasure in her cousin's happiness with growing concern about the social implications. Miss Eugenia Fairmont accepted other attentions with visible relief, having found Lord Charles's interest flattering, but his intensity somewhat unsettling. The Dowager Countess of Ravenfield began a campaign of strategic intervention that would have impressed military tacticians for its comprehensive approach. The library at Thornley Manor became their refuge. Lady Beatrice maintained propriety by remaining within calling distance, often seated by the window watching the rain. But the cousins had reached an unspoken agreement that Cerridwen deserved some privacy in her unlikely courtship. It was in this sanctuary that genuine intimacy developed, built on conversation rather than choreographed social performance. Tell me about Snowdonia, Charles requested one afternoon as rain drummed relentlessly against the windows, a constant rhythm in this year without a summer. What do you miss most? Cerridwen set aside her embroidery, a task she performed with evident lack of enthusiasm. The mountains, not these gentle English hills that roll like sleeping dogs, but proper mountains that demand respect, peaks that pierce clouds, slopes where one false step means death, landscapes that remind you how small you are and how brief your time. That sounds rather bleak. It sounds honest. English society tries to pretend death and difficulty do not exist. We dress everything in comfortable lies and elaborate rituals meant to maintain the illusion of control. Welsh mountains refuse such pretense. They simply are, indifferent to human comfort or convenience. You sound homesick. I am homesick for truth, Lord Charles. Wales has poverty and hardship, but people speak plainly. They do not smile while plotting your destruction. They do not offer friendship while calculating advantage. I find English manners exhausting in their insincerity. Not all English people embrace such duplicity. No, she agreed softly, meeting his eyes. Not all. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken recognition. Charles set down his teacup with deliberate care and moved to sit beside her on the settee, closer than strict propriety allowed, but not so close as to constitute absolute scandal. Cerridwen, I must ask you something, and I require your honest answer regardless of social niceties. You need never request honesty from me. It is my persistent failing. Do you feel this as well? This sense that when we are together, something fundamental shifts, as though I have been living in a house where all the windows were painted shut, and suddenly one has been thrown open and I can breathe properly for the first time in years. Her breath caught. Yes, she whispered. I feel precisely that, and it terrifies me. Why? Because I swore never to marry an Englishman. Because I promised myself I would not surrender my independence to become someone's mute ornament. Because every instinct I possess warns me that allowing myself to care for you will end in pain when reality intrudes, and you realize that duty requires someone more suitable than a Welsh spinster with radical opinions and a face marked by the sun. Charles reached for her hand, and she did not withdraw. What if duty is the lie we tell ourselves to avoid risking genuine feeling? What if the truly brave choice is to acknowledge that a life spent performing obligation is no life at all? Charles, you cannot mean this. Your mother has made clear her expectations. Your position requires a suitable countess. I am Welsh, opinionated, unseemly. I will never be what English society expects. Thank God for that, he said fervently. Cerridwen, I have spent months being introduced to appropriate ladies who would make appropriate countesses and produce appropriate heirs to inherit appropriate titles. And I have felt nothing except the slowly gathering conviction that if this is what my life must be, then perhaps my brother had the right idea dying young, before he could be trapped by duty. Do not say such things. Why not? They are honest, and you value honesty. I value your life more than honesty. The words escaped before she could examine their implications, but once spoken they could not be retracted. Charles stared at her, and something in his expression shifted from hope to certainty. I am going to kiss you now, he said quietly. If you do not wish it, you need only say so, and I will never speak of this again. Cerridwen felt her entire world narrow to this moment, this choice. Every rational instinct warned her to refuse. Every lesson she had absorbed about protecting her independence and avoiding English entanglements screamed at her to withdraw. But beneath those learned cautions lay something more fundamental. A longing she had spent 28 years denying. A possibility she had convinced herself did not exist. I wish it, she whispered. The kiss began gently, almost tentatively, as though both feared the other might shatter at excessive force. But gentleness quickly transformed into something more urgent, more honest. Charles gathered her closer, and Cerridwen felt herself respond with an abandon that would have shocked her rational self. This was not the polite brush of lips she had imagined proper courtship might involve. This was hunger and recognition, and the desperate relief of two people who had found something they had not known they were seeking. When they finally separated, both were breathing as though they had run up a Welsh mountainside. Charles rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. I love you, he said simply. I did not plan to. I did not expect to. But I do. You have made me believe that sincere feeling might matter more than appropriate lineage. That genuine connection might be worth risking everything society tells me I should value. Charles. His name emerged as both prayer and warning. You cannot throw away everything for me. Your duty, your family, your legacy. These things have sustained your family for generations. And what good is a legacy if it requires me to betray everything I believe in order to preserve it? What use is duty if it demands I sacrifice the only genuine thing I have found in years? Your mother will never accept this. My mother will accept what I choose. I am the Earl, not her. The decision is mine. You speak as though this is simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. I love you. You love me unless I am profoundly mistaken in reading your response. Everything else is merely noise we allow to drown out what matters. Cerridwen wanted desperately to believe him, but she had lived too long in the world, seen too many promises broken when tested by reality's demands, to trust that love alone could overcome the combined opposition of society, family, and expectation. I need time to think, she said finally. This is too much, too quickly. Take whatever time you require, but Cerridwen, understand this. I am not one of your previous suitors seeking an ornament. I want you. Your opinions, your arguments, your impossible Welsh pride, and your refusal to accept comfortable lies. All of it. If you can believe nothing else, believe that. The Dowager Countess of Ravenfield did not achieve her position in society through passive acceptance of circumstances. When direct opposition failed, she employed more subtle strategies. And so she began a campaign designed to separate her son from the unsuitable Welsh attachment before irreparable commitment occurred. The whispers began subtly. No one could trace them to their source. But suddenly every drawing room in Shropshire buzzed with speculation about the Earl of Ravenfield and his inappropriate interest in a provincial Welsh spinster. Questions were raised about Miss Hughes's background, her family connections, her education. Had anyone verified her lineage? Was she perhaps seeking to entrap an Earl through calculated appeal to his sympathies? Such things had happened before, after all. Lady Beatrice confronted Constance directly when the rumours reached her ears. Your attacks on my cousin are unconscionable, Beatrice declared, finding the Dowager in her morning room 3 days after Charles's kiss in the Thornley Manor library. Cerridwen has done nothing except be herself, and your son appears to value that candour. My dear Lady Beatrice, Constance replied with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever, I have no idea what you mean. I have made no attacks. If society has reached certain conclusions about your cousin's suitability, perhaps you should examine her behaviour, rather than seeking to assign blame elsewhere. Charles loves her. Charles believes he loves her. There is a considerable difference. My son has always possessed a romantic nature that must be guarded against impractical impulses. He will thank me eventually for protecting him from a disastrous misalliance. He is 33 years old and Earl of Ravenfield. He does not require your protection. Every man requires protection from his worst instincts, Lady Beatrice, even Earls, especially Earls. The campaign intensified. Constance arranged for Charles to escort Miss Louisa Cavendish to various events, engineering situations where they would be seen together. Miss Louisa, daughter of a viscount and possessed of excellent connections, represented precisely the sort of alliance the Ravenfield title required. She was accomplished, appropriate, and most importantly, entirely willing to accept the role Constance envisioned for her son's wife. Charles endured these arrangements with barely concealed frustration, but his mother was skilled at employing guilt and obligation as weapons, his duty to the title, his responsibility to family legacy, his brother's memory demanding proper stewardship of the inheritance. Each argument carefully calculated to exploit his sense of honor. Meanwhile, the whispers continued. Miss Hughes was inappropriate. Miss Hughes was unsuitable. Miss Hughes was using radical philosophy and Welsh exoticism to entrap an Earl who had been weakened by grief and war. Kind friends assured Lady Beatrice that they meant no harm, but surely she could see the concern. An Earl could not marry a Welsh spinster of unknown connections. The scandal would destroy both of them. Cerridwen heard the whispers. She felt the cutting glances and carefully cultivated snubs. She watched as women who had been cordial became cold, as invitations ceased, as doors literally closed in her face. And she made a decision. The confrontation occurred in the gardens of Thornley Manor, on a morning when fog clung to the ground like funeral shrouds. Charles had arrived early, determined to speak with Cerridwen about his mother's campaign and his decision to proceed with their courtship, regardless of opposition. He found her standing among the roses, still beautiful despite the advancing season, and something in her posture warned him of disaster. Cerridwen, I must speak with you about my mother's behavior. She has been unconscionable, and I intend to make clear that her interference will not be tolerated. Your mother is protecting your interests, Charles, as mothers do." The formal use of his title rather than his given name struck like a physical blow. What has happened? Nothing has happened. I have simply recognized what should have been obvious from the beginning. You are Earl of Ravenfield. I am a Welsh spinster with radical opinions and an unladylike complexion. Whatever momentary attraction existed between us cannot overcome the fundamental incompatibility of our positions. This is not you speaking. This is fear. This is the whispers and the cuts and the carefully orchestrated campaign my mother has waged. Do not let her win, Cerridwen. Do not surrender what we have simply because facing opposition requires courage. I am not surrendering anything, my lord. I am recognizing reality. You require a wife who can navigate English society, manage your households, produce heirs without causing scandal. I cannot be that woman. I will not transform myself into something acceptable simply to ease your way. I do not want you transformed. I want you exactly as you are. Then you want something impossible. Because what I am and what your position requires are fundamentally incompatible. I will not be the cause of your destruction, Charles. I will not watch you throw away everything for me and then spend the rest of your life resenting what you sacrificed. How can you believe I would resent loving you? Because love is not enough. The words burst from her with desperate intensity. Love does not pay debts or manage estates or navigate social consequences. Love does not protect you when your family disowns you or society ostracizes you. Love does not prevent regret when reality proves harsher than romantic impulses. You are afraid, Charles said quietly, and I understand that. But Cerridwen, hiding from possibility because we fear the cost is the action of cowards. We are not cowards. Perhaps I am, Charles. Perhaps I have always been a coward hiding behind philosophy and Welsh pride. Because the truth is that I am terrified of caring for you the way I do. I am terrified of needing someone, of allowing my happiness to depend on whether they choose me or their duty. And I am terrified that if I let myself believe this could work, the destruction when it fails will be more than I can survive. Then let me prove your fears groundless. Let me demonstrate through action, rather than words, that what we have is worth fighting for. How? By alienating your family? By destroying your standing in society? By producing children who will be ostracized for having a Welsh mother with inappropriate opinions? I will not do that to you, Charles. I will not be the selfish creature your mother paints me to be, so desperate for status that I ignore the damage I cause. You are not selfish. You are the least selfish person I have encountered in this soul-destroying society. But you are wrong about this, Cerridwen. You are so wrong. I am returning to Wales, she said, and her voice held the finality of decisions made in darkness and grief. My father has written offering reconciliation if I abandon this English season. Colonel Harrington has withdrawn his suit in favor of younger prospects. I can go home. I can return to mountains that do not judge me and people who value candor over elaborate performance. You swore upon your mother's grave never to marry an Englishman. Yes, and I am keeping that vow. Even if the Englishman in question loves you. Especially then, because if I married you, I would spend every day watching you regret your choice, watching you look at your children and wonder what they might have been if you had married appropriately, watching your family relationships crumble because you chose me over their approval. I will not do that to you, Charles. I love you too much to allow you to destroy yourself. So you choose to destroy us both instead. I choose to let you have the life you deserve. A proper English countess who knows how to manage your households and navigate society and produce heirs without causing scandal. Someone your mother will accept, your family will embrace, your position demands. Everything I can never be. I do not want everything you can never be. I want you. You want a dream, Charles, and dreams shatter when dawn arrives. She turned and walked toward the manor before he could respond, before he could see the tears streaming down her face, before she could lose the courage required to make this necessary sacrifice. Behind her, Charles stood among the dying roses and felt something fundamental break. The following days passed in a haze of misery for both parties. Cerridwen made preparations to return to Wales, packing her belongings with methodical precision, while Lady Beatrice hovered nearby, offering ineffective comfort. Charles threw himself into estate management with grim determination, accepting social obligations his mother arranged with the blank compliance of someone who no longer cared what happened to him. The midsummer ball at Ravenfield Hall approached. Constance planned it with the triumphant energy of someone who had won a significant victory. Miss Louisa Cavendish would be the guest of honour. Charles would escort her. By the end of the evening, an understanding would be reached, if not a formal betrothal. Everything was proceeding according to the Dowager's carefully crafted plan. Except that 2 days before the ball, Charles discovered a document that changed everything. He had entered the morning room looking for a particular ledger, his mind preoccupied with estate matters. The room was empty, but a partially burned letter sat on the hearth, clearly intended for the fire, but having slipped from the grate. Charles bent to retrieve it, intending to toss it back into the flames, but the handwriting caught his eye. It was Lady Sophronia Radcliffe's distinct scrawl, addressed to his mother. He read the visible fragments with growing horror. "My dear Constance," strategy regarding the Welsh girl was masterful, convinced her of her own inadequacy. The whispers were most effective. She fled like a frightened rabbit. Now Charles is free to make the appropriate choice. Charles stood frozen, the paper trembling in his hand. Rage and revelation warred for dominance. His mother had not simply opposed his attachment to Cerridwen. She had orchestrated a campaign specifically designed to prey upon the woman's insecurities and fears. She had manipulated both of them, using his sense of duty against him and Cerridwen's fear of causing harm against her. And Cerridwen had believed it. She had convinced herself that leaving represented noble sacrifice, when in truth it was simply surrender to orchestrated intimidation. The rage crystallized into perfect clarity. His mother would not win. Duty would not win. The suffocating expectations of English society would not win. He would not spend his life performing obligation, while the only genuine thing he had ever found was allowed to escape because facing opposition required courage. Charles turned and strode from the house, calling for his horse with such urgency that the stablemaster assumed an emergency. He rode to Thornley Manor with reckless speed, arriving wind-blown and wild-eyed in a manner that scandalized the butler. "Miss Hughes," he demanded, "where is she?" "I believe she is preparing to depart for Wales tomorrow morning, my lord. Lady Beatrice is with her in the blue bedchamber." Charles took the stairs 2 at a time, propriety abandoned entirely. He found Cerridwen's room and knocked once before entering without permission, an action so shocking that both women froze in a tableau of interrupted packing. "Charles," Lady Beatrice gasped, "you cannot be here. This is most improper. Leave us," he commanded, his eyes fixed on Cerridwen's pale face. "I most certainly will not. The scandal if anyone discovered a gentleman in my cousin's bedchamber would be absolute." "Then let there be scandal. I have had enough of propriety and enough of allowing other people's expectations to determine my choices. Leave us, Lady Beatrice, please." Something in his voice convinced her. She glanced between Charles and Cerridwen, seemed to reach some decision, and departed with visible reluctance. "Charles, you should not be here." "I love you," he said without preamble. "My mother orchestrated the whispers and the cuts and the campaign to separate us. I found a letter from Lady Sophronia congratulating her on the success of their plot. This was not society reaching organic conclusions about your suitability. This was calculated manipulation designed to exploit your fears. It does not matter. The concerns remain valid regardless of their source. The concerns are cowardice hiding behind rational justification. You are afraid, Cerridwen, and I understand that. But I am also afraid. I am terrified of spending my life performing duty while the woman I love disappears into Wales, because facing opposition required more courage than either of us possessed. I am terrified of becoming the man I was before I met you, going through the motions of existence without ever actually living. I am terrified that if I let you leave, I will spend the rest of my life wondering what we might have had if we were brave enough to fight for it. Charles." Her voice broke on his name, Even if your mother manufactured the opposition, the fundamental problems remain. I am Welsh. I am inappropriate. I will never be what English society expects. Thank God for that, he said fervently, crossing to kneel before her so they were eye to eye. Cerridwen, I do not want what English society expects. I want you, your opinions and your arguments and your impossible Welsh pride, your refusal to pretend, and your insistence on honesty even when lies would be more comfortable, your sun-touched skin and your radical philosophy and your complete inability to behave as a silent statue. All of it, every inappropriate, unsuitable, scandalous part of you. You say that now. But when reality intrudes, when your family makes their displeasure known, when society closes ranks against us, you will regret this choice. I will regret nothing except allowing you to leave. Cerridwen, I have lived the alternative. I have spent months allowing my mother to parade appropriate candidates before me. I have performed the role of dutiful son and responsible Earl, and I have felt nothing except the slow death of everything that makes life worth living. You made me feel alive again. You made me believe that authentic connection might matter more than appropriate lineage. Do not take that away from me now. What if we fail? What if the opposition proves too much? Then we will fail together, he said simply. But at least we will fail honestly, rather than spending our lives wondering what might have been if we possessed sufficient courage. I swore upon my mother's grave never to marry an Englishman. Your mother wanted you happy, Cerridwen. Would she truly want you to honor a vow made in anger and pain if it meant refusing a chance at love? The tears came then, streaming down her face with the force of damned grief finally released. I am so afraid, Charles. I am afraid of needing you. I am afraid of caring this much. I am afraid that if I let myself hope, the disappointment when it ends will destroy me. I cannot promise perfection, he said, gathering her hands in his. I cannot promise that we will never face difficulty or opposition or regret, but I can promise that I will fight for us. I can promise that I will value your true nature over society's approval. I can promise that whatever challenges we will face them together as partners, rather than as master and ornament. Can you trust me enough to try? Yes, she whispered. God help me, yes. He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home after years of exile. When they finally separated, he remained kneeling before her, his expression serious. My mother is hosting a midsummer ball in 2 days. She has planned it as a venue for announcing my understanding with Miss Louisa Cavendish. I intend to use it for a rather different announcement. Charles, you cannot mean to make this public at your mother's event. The scandal would be catastrophic. The scandal will be unavoidable regardless of venue. Better to control the circumstances than to allow rumor and speculation to define us. Will you attend? Will you walk into that ballroom on my arm and show English society that you are not intimidated by their opposition? You ask me to enter the lion's den. I ask you to be brave. Not for me, though I confess I need your courage to bolster my own, but for yourself. Show them that a Welsh spinster with radical opinions and unfashionable complexion possesses more genuine worth than all their carefully cultivated appropriateness. What if they reject us both? Then we will find new society that values candor over pretense. But Cerridwen, I do not believe they will. I believe that beneath all the performance and artifice, there are people who understand that genuine connection matters more than appropriate lineage. And even if there are not, even if we are ostracized entirely, it will still be worth it to have chosen honest love over comfortable duty. She studied his face, searching for any hint of doubt or uncertainty. She found only determination and something that looked remarkably like hope. Very well, she said. I will attend your mother's ball, and I will stand beside you when you make whatever announcement you plan. But Charles, understand this. I will not apologize for being Welsh or opinionated or inappropriate. If you want me, you must accept all of me. That is precisely what I want, he said. All of you. Nothing less will do. The 2 days before the midsummer ball passed in a flurry of preparation and growing dread. Lady Beatrice alternated between excitement at the romantic triumph and terror at the social consequences. Constance remained oblivious to the impending disaster, secure in her conviction that everything was proceeding according to plan, and Cerridwen faced her wardrobe with the grim determination of a soldier preparing for battle. "The crimson silk," she announced finally. Lady Beatrice blanched. "Cousin, that is rather bold. Perhaps something more subdued would be appropriate for your first major social appearance since the rumors began." "I am Welsh, Beatrice. We do not do subdued. If I am to walk into that ballroom and face the combined disapproval of English society, I will do so honestly, rather than attempting to disguise myself as something acceptable. You are braver than I could ever be." "I am terrified," Cerridwen admitted, "but I am tired of letting fear determine my choices. Charles has risked everything for me. The least I can do is risk public humiliation." The evening of the ball arrived with weather that seemed designed for dramatic purposes. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning flickered across darkening skies. Cerridwen dressed with meticulous care, the crimson silk gown transforming her from provincial curiosity into something that commanded attention. She left her hair simply dressed, refusing to torture it into elaborate constructions that would betray her discomfort. Her sun-touched skin she made no attempt to disguise. This was who she was. English society would accept her on these terms, or not at all. The carriage ride to Ravenfield Hall passed in tense silence. Lady Beatrice clutched her reticule as though it might provide protection against impending disaster. Cerridwen stared out the window at approaching storm clouds and wondered if she was making the bravest decision of her life or the most foolish. Ravenfield Hall blazed with candlelight, every window glowing golden against the darkening sky. Carriages lined the drive, depositing guests who chatted with excitement about the anticipated announcement regarding Lord Charles and Miss Louisa Cavendish. Cerridwen felt her courage waver as she observed the crowd, but then she remembered Charles kneeling before her in the blue bedchamber, asking her to be brave. She stepped from the carriage with her head high and her spine straight. The crimson silk gown drew immediate attention, as did her simply dressed hair and unconcealed complexion. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. What was the Welsh girl doing here? Had she not been sent back to Wales? Was she so shameless as to return after being rejected? Lady Beatrice stayed close, her presence offering what protection reputation could provide. They entered the house and made their way toward the ballroom, and with each step, Cerridwen felt the weight of judgment pressing down like physical force. Faces turned toward her. Conversation stopped. Some women deliberately turned their backs in the calculated snub known as the cut direct. She had almost reached the ballroom entrance when a familiar figure appeared before her. Constance, Dowager Countess of Ravenfield, resplendent in blue silk and diamonds, blocked the doorway with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. "Miss Hughes, how unexpected to see you this evening. I was under the impression you had returned to Wales." "I delayed my departure, Lady Ravenfield." "How unfortunate. I'm afraid this event is by invitation only, and I do not recall extending one to you." "I invited her, Mother." Charles appeared at Cerridwen's side, and the assembled crowd drew collective breath. He was magnificent in his evening attire, every inch the Earl of Ravenfield. But it was the expression on his face as he looked at Cerridwen that caused genuine shock. This was not polite courtesy. This was not duty. This was unmistakable love, declared publicly for all to witness. "Charles, surely you cannot mean to make a spectacle by bringing this person to my ball. I mean to bring the woman I love to what will hopefully become our betrothal celebration. Please step aside, Mother." Constance's face drained of color. "You cannot be serious. After everything I have done to protect you from this disastrous mistake." "You mean after everything you did to manipulate both of us through manufactured opposition and strategic whispers?" "Yes, Mother. I know about that. I found the letter from Lady Sophronia, and while I understand you believed you were acting in my best interests, you were profoundly wrong. I will not permit this. You no longer have that authority. I am Earl of Ravenfield, not you, and I have made my choice." He offered his arm to Cerridwen with such deliberate formality that refusal would have been impossible even had she wished it. She placed her hand on his sleeve, and together they entered the ballroom. The music stopped. Conversation ceased. Every eye fixed upon the unlikely pair as they walked across the polished floor toward the center of the room. Miss Louisa Cavendish stood near the refreshment table, her face a study in confusion and dawning dismay. Lady Sophronia Radcliffe clutched her fan as though it might provide protection against scandal, and throughout the assembled crowd, shock competed with avid curiosity about what would happen next. Charles led Cerridwen to the centre of the ballroom and turned to face the gathered guests. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Thank you all for attending this evening. I know many of you expected an announcement regarding Miss Louisa Cavendish. I must apologize for that confusion, as the expectation was manufactured without my consent or participation." "Charles," his mother hissed from the doorway. "Stop this immediately." He ignored her. "I wish to introduce Miss Cerridwen Hughes of Snowdonia. She is Welsh, opinionated, entirely inappropriate by society's conventional standards, and the most remarkable woman I have ever encountered. She reads radical philosophy and questions authority, and refuses to pretend agreement when she holds opposing views. She possesses more genuine intelligence and authentic courage than anyone in this room, and I am asking her to marry me, despite knowing I represent everything she swore never to accept." The silence that followed his declaration stretched painful and tense. Cerridwen felt every eye upon her, judging, assessing, condemning. Then Charles turned to face her directly, and suddenly the crowd ceased to matter. "Cerridwen Hughes, I love you not despite your Welsh origins, but because of everything that makes you uniquely yourself. I love your refusal to accept comfortable lies and your insistence on honest discourse. I love your impossible pride and your radical opinions and your complete inability to behave as a mute ornament. I love that you make me question assumptions and challenge inherited beliefs. I love that you see me not as the Earl of Ravenfield, but as simply Charles, a man trying to find meaning in a world that too often values performance over candor." He knelt before her, and gasps rippled through the crowd at this breach of propriety. "I'm not asking you to transform yourself into something acceptable. I am asking you to remain exactly as you are and allow me the privilege of standing beside you as we navigate whatever opposition our choice brings. Will you marry me? Not because I am an earl or because society expects it, but because we have found something genuine in a world that seems determined to suffocate authentic connection beneath layers of meaningless convention." Cerridwen felt tears streaming down her face, but she made no attempt to hide them. "I am Welsh, Charles. I am opinionated and inappropriate and 28 years old with sun-touched skin. I read Mary Wollstonecraft and question authority, and will never be the sort of decorative countess your mother envisions. I know. That is precisely why I love you. I swore upon my mother's grave never to marry an Englishman." "I know that too, but you also said your mother wanted you happy. Would she truly want you to honor a vow made in pain if it meant refusing love?" "No," Cerridwen whispered. "She would want me to be brave enough to risk hoping." "Then be brave with me. Say yes." "Yes." The word emerged as half sob, half laugh. "Yes, Charles Lockwood, I will marry you, not because you are Earl of Ravenfield, but because you see me as I am, and love me anyway. Because you value candor over appropriateness, and genuine connection over comfortable convention. Because you make me believe that perhaps independence and partnership need not be mutually exclusive if both parties approach union with honesty and respect." Charles rose and kissed her, and the scandal was absolute. A public kiss in a ballroom before betrothal was formally announced represented shocking impropriety. Several matrons gasped in horror, a few young ladies giggled nervously, and in the doorway, Constance stood frozen in a tableau of complete defeat. But then something unexpected occurred. From the edge of the crowd, a single gentleman began to applaud. Sir Percival Hertford, the same widower who had observed Cerridwen with kindness upon her arrival weeks earlier, walked forward with a smile on his weathered face. "Well done, Ravenfield," he said warmly. "It is about time someone in this company possessed sufficient courage to value character over pedigree. Miss Hughes, you are most welcome to English society despite its many failings. And my late wife, who would have adored your radical opinions, sends her blessings from whatever realm departed spirits inhabit." His support, unexpected and entirely genuine, seemed to break some invisible barrier. Other guests began to applaud, tentatively at first and then with growing enthusiasm. Not all of them, certainly. Lady Sophronia departed with visible huffiness, and several other families made strategic exits that announced their disapproval more effectively than words. But enough remained, and enough offered congratulations, that the evening transformed from anticipated disaster into cautious triumph. Miss Louisa Cavendish approached with surprising grace. "Lord Charles, I confess relief rather than disappointment. You are an admirable gentleman, but I have no desire to be married for duty when you so obviously love another. Miss Hughes, I wish you joy." Constance remained in the doorway, neither advancing nor retreating. Charles approached her after accepting numerous congratulations, and the confrontation everyone anticipated occurred in hushed tones that nevertheless carried across the ballroom. "Mother, I understand you believed you were protecting me, but you were wrong. Cerridwen does not represent a threat to family legacy. She represents the possibility that legacy might mean something more than accumulated titles and appropriate bloodlines. You are throwing away everything your brother died to preserve. I'm honoring my brother by refusing to waste my life performing obligation without genuine feeling. He would understand that, even if you cannot. Society will punish you for this. Then we will find new society, or we will simply stop caring what judgmental people think. Mother, you may accept this or not as you choose, but understand that Cerridwen will be my wife. If you cannot welcome her, you are welcome to remain at the Dower House and have no contact with us. The choice is yours." The Dowager Countess studied her son's face and seemed to recognize something she had never seen before. Not defiance, precisely, but certainty. He had made his choice, and no amount of manipulation or guilt would alter it. "I need time," she said finally. "This is not what I wanted for you. I know, but it is what I want. And I am asking you to trust that I know my own heart better than you know my duty." Constance departed without further argument, and the ball continued with the strange energy of an event that had become far more interesting than anyone anticipated. Cerridwen found herself surrounded by curious guests asking about Wales and radical philosophy, and whether she truly intended to educate tenant children as rumour suggested. She answered honestly, refusing to soften her opinions for palatability, and discovered that some people genuinely appreciated candour even when it contradicted their assumptions. Charles never left her side, his hand at her back, providing silent support as she navigated the social waters that had seemed so threatening. And slowly, tentatively, Cerridwen allowed herself to hope that perhaps they might survive this after all. The wedding occurred 3 months later in the chapel at Ravenfield Hall. It was smaller than traditional aristocratic ceremonies, attended only by those willing to publicly support the unconventional union. Lady Beatrice served as Cerridwen's matron of honour with barely concealed delight. Sir Percival Hertford stood up with Charles, offering the weight of his respect to the proceedings. Constance attended, though her expression suggested she was still wrestling with acceptance. But she was there, which represented progress Charles had not dared hope for. Cerridwen wore a gown of ivory silk that Lady Beatrice had commissioned from the finest modiste in London. Her hair was simply dressed with Welsh mountain flowers woven through the dark curls. She refused to powder away her sun-touched complexion, and when she walked down the aisle, her expression held equal parts hope and defiance. Charles watched her approach and felt something fundamental settle into place. This was right. This was worth every bit of opposition and scandal and family discord. This was the only choice that mattered. The vows they exchanged were traditional in structure, but weighted with personal significance. When Charles promised to honor and cherish, he meant honoring her opinions even when they contradicted his own, and cherishing her sincerity even when it complicated his life. When Cerridwen promised to love and obey, she meant loving him enough to trust partnership, and obeying only her own conscience while respecting his equally independent spirit. They kissed as man and wife, and the small congregation applauded. Not everyone approved, not everyone understood, but enough people recognized that genuine connection mattered more than appropriate alliance, that the day felt like triumph rather than scandal. The wedding breakfast featured both English and Welsh traditions, a blending that Cerridwen insisted upon. Despite puzzled reactions from some guests, there were speeches and toasts, and Sir Percival offered a blessing that acknowledged the courage required to choose authentic love over comfortable duty. The following months brought challenges precisely as anticipated. Some families refused to receive them. Certain doors remained closed. The most rigid adherents to social convention treated the Earl of Ravenfield and his Welsh countess as cautionary examples of what happened when people valued feeling over appropriate alliance. But other doors opened. Progressive thinkers sought their company. Young people defying family expectations looked to them as proof that alternative paths existed. And gradually, carefully, Charles and Cerridwen built a life that honored both his responsibilities and her independence. Cerridwen established a library at Ravenfield Village, stocking it with books that challenged comfortable assumptions and encouraged independent thought. She began teaching tenant children to read, scandalizing traditionalists, but earning genuine gratitude from families who recognized the value of education. She rode across the estate without excessive chaperonage, inspected tenant cottages, and demanded improvements that shocked estate managers accustomed to passive countesses, and generally behaved as though her Welsh upbringing had never suggested that English aristocratic ladies were meant to be silent ornaments. Charles supported every unconventional choice, defending her against criticism, and publicly acknowledging that his wife's intelligence enhanced rather than threatened the Ravenfield legacy. He consulted her opinion on estate management, included her in political discussions, and never once asked her to pretend agreement when she held opposing views. Their first child, a son born 18 months after their wedding, possessed his mother's raven hair and his father's grey eyes. They named him Owen for Cerridwen's father, and Michael for Charles's brother, a blending of Welsh and English heritage that seemed appropriate for a child who would inherit both traditions. Constance arrived to meet her grandson 3 days after his birth. She stood at the cradle for a long time, studying the infant's features with an expression Charles could not quite interpret. Finally, she looked up at her son and daughter-in-law with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "He is beautiful," she said quietly, "and he will inherit a legacy that includes more than accumulated titles if you raise him as you clearly intend. We will raise him to think independently and value candor over appropriateness," Cerridwen replied gently. "Just as we were raised ourselves. I spent decades believing that appropriate alliances and genealogical precision represented the highest achievement," Constance admitted. "But watching you two together, seeing the genuine affection that sustains your partnership despite opposition, I begin to wonder if perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps the strongest families are built on mutual regard rather than strategic calculation." "Mother, that may be the wisest thing you have ever said," Charles replied, reaching for Cerridwen's hand. The years that followed brought additional children, growing acceptance from society as their marriage proved both stable and genuinely affectionate, and a reputation as the couple who had dared to value truth over appropriateness. Young people facing impossible choices sought their advice. Families navigating disapproval pointed to the Earl and Countess of Ravenfield as proof that alternative paths could lead to happiness rather than ruin. Cerridwen never entirely shed her reputation as the Welsh radical, who had somehow entrapped an Earl, but she wore it with pride rather than shame. She continued to educate tenant children, establish libraries, and generally behave as though being Countess of Ravenfield did not require abandoning everything that made her uniquely herself. Charles thrived in ways that surprised those who had known him during his months of dutiful misery. His estate prospered under management that valued tenant welfare, alongside aristocratic profit. His political influence grew as he advocated for reforms that shocked traditionalists, but resonated with people tired of defending privilege solely for its own sake. And their marriage became something of a legend. The Welsh spinster who swore never to wed an Englishman, and the Earl who valued candor over appropriateness. The couple who chose genuine connection over comfortable conformity, and built a family legacy stronger for being rooted in mutual respect rather than genealogical calculation. Years later, when Owen was 10 years old and his sister Catherine 7, Charles found Cerridwen in the library at Ravenfield Hall. She sat near the window reading political philosophy while rain drummed against the glass, and the scene was so perfectly characteristic that he paused simply to observe. "You are staring, husband," she said without looking up from her book. "I'm appreciating, wife. There is a considerable difference." She smiled and set aside her volume. "Come sit with me. I have been reading Godwin again, and wanting to argue with someone about the relationship between individual liberty and social responsibility. "Of course you have." He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Our son asked me today why some families refuse to visit us. What did you tell him?" "I told him that some people value appropriateness over candor and cannot forgive others for choosing differently, and that their disapproval represents their limitation, not ours." "Good answer," Cerridwen said approvingly. "I would not want our children raised to believe that conformity matters more than conscience. They will be raised exactly as we were raised ourselves, to think independently, to question authority when it demands they betray their values, to understand that genuine feeling matters more than performed obligation, even if that independence makes their lives more difficult. Especially then, easy paths that require betraying oneself are far more destructive than difficult paths that allow one to remain true." Cerridwen leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as rain continued its percussion against the windows. Outside, the Ravenfield estate spread across the landscape in a patchwork of fields and forests and tenant cottages, where children now learned to read in the library the Welsh countess had established. Inside, their own children played under the supervision of a nurse who had been instructed to encourage curiosity rather than suppress it. "I am glad I broke my vow," Cerridwen said softly. "The one I swore upon my mother's grave about never marrying an Englishman." "Are you?" "Yes, because you taught me that independence need not mean isolation, that partnership can exist without possession, that it is possible to love someone without losing oneself. I was wrong to believe that all marriages required surrender of identity. Some marriages, when built on mutual respect and genuine regard, actually enlarge both parties rather than diminishing them." "You taught me something as well," Charles replied. "You taught me that duty performed without genuine feeling is just elaborate suicide. That legacy means nothing if it requires betraying everything I believe in order to preserve it. That the courage to choose authentic connection over appropriate alliance represents true nobility rather than scandal." "We sound insufferably philosophical." "We are insufferably philosophical. It is one of our more endearing qualities." They sat together as afternoon faded into evening, discussing politics and philosophy, and the challenges of raising children to think independently in a world that too often rewarded conformity. And they were content, not perfectly happy every moment, because life was complicated and opposition remained real, but genuinely content in ways that people who chose duty over desire could never fully comprehend. The Welsh spinster, who swore never to wed an Englishman, had found love with the Earl, who valued candor over appropriateness, and together they built a life that honored both their differences and their shared commitment to living honestly rather than performing obligation. It was not always easy, but it was always worth it, and that ultimately was the only measure that mattered. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story of courage and love that defies convention touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of genuine feeling, fierce independence, and the transformative power of choosing authenticity over appropriateness.